In 1966, an entire ship vanished. 16 years later, it returned, haunted by something unspeakable. What really happened aboard the SS Orion? Subscribe and hit the bell, unlock the deepest secrets of the sea. The Atlantic Ocean in 1966 was a vast, unyielding expanse of deep blue and churning gray, a place where ships became tiny specks battling against the endless horizon. On a crisp March morning, the SS Orion, a mighty cargo vessel loaded with machinery bound for London, slipped away from Miami Harbor. Sunlight glinted off her freshly painted hull, and the low thrum of her engines promised a steady journey. Captain Elias Vance, a man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen 30 years of ocean storms, stood tall on the bridge. His final radio call crackled with routine confidence. Miami Control, this is Orion. Course set. Weather clear. Next report in 12 hours. Then silence. Not a crackle of static. Not a whisper of distress. The Orion, her 42 souls, and her valuable cargo simply melted into the empty sea. For weeks, search planes scoured thousands of square miles. Ships crisscrossed potential routes. Hope, initially a bright flame, dwindled under the weight of empty horizons and radio static. Coast Guard Commander Harris, a man whose face grew grimmer with each passing day, finally addressed the press, his voice heavy. No debris, no défibrillats, no signals. It's as if the Orion vanished, off the face of the water. The families left behind were trapped in a nightmare. Sarah Vance, the captain's wife, kept his favorite pipe on the mantel, its cold bowl a daily reminder. Young Tommy Miller, whose father was the ship's engineer, would stare at old photographs, whispering, "He promised he'd be back for my birthday." Maritime historians pored over charts, whispered about the treacherous currents near the Bermuda Triangle, but found no answers. The mystery became a ghost story told in dockside bars and academic journals. A haunting void where a great ship should have been. Years bled into a decade. The ache dulled, but never disappeared. Then, on a fog-shrouded dawn in March 1982, exactly 16 years to the day since the disappearance, the impossible happened. A U.S. Navy patrol plane, its engines droning monotonously over a desolate stretch of the Atlantic far from any shipping lane, cut through thick mist. Lieutenant Carla Diaz, peering through binoculars during a routine sweep, froze. Pilot looked dead ahead. 11 o'clock low. Below them, emerging from the swirling gray like a phantom, lay the unmistakable silhouette of a large cargo ship. It drifted silently, unnaturally still. Recognition hit like ice water. My God, the pilot breathed, checking his charts twice. That registry, that's the Orion. But that's impossible. The plane banked low. There she was, the SS Orion. Her paint was bleached and peeling. Rust streaked her sides like old wounds. But her structure was startlingly intact. No visible damage. No lifeboats missing. Just there, floating, waiting. The pilot radioed base, his voice tight with disbelief. "Command, we have visual confirmation. It's her, the Orion. She's just sitting here." A salvage team, led by the now-retired Commander Harris, scrambled to reach the ghost ship. As their cutter drew alongside the towering, silent hull, an unnatural quiet pressed down. The Orion loomed above them, water gently lapping against her sides. No movement, no sound, just the creak of her ancient timbers and the sigh of the wind through her rigging, a sound like a ghost whispering secrets into the fog. The mystery hadn't ended with her vanishing. It had only just begun, and the silence of the Orion was far more terrifying than the storm that never came. The boarding ladder hung down, stiff and weathered, an invitation into a tomb frozen in time. Taking a deep breath, Commander Harris grabbed the cold, salt-crusted rungs, his boots echoing with a too loud thud on the metal as he stepped onto the deck he thought he'd never see again. The air felt thick, stale, heavy with 16 years of undisturbed ocean solitude. Sunlight, weak through the lingering fog, illuminated a scene of profound abandonment. Deck chairs lay scattered, bleached white by sun and salt. A coil of rope lay perfectly coiled near a hatch, as if waiting for hands that never returned. Yet, the strangeness started subtly. Harris knelt, brushing dust from the deck near the railing. Etched crudely into the wood, barely visible beneath the grime, was a series of overlapping circles, like frantic, unskilled attempts to draw a target. Nearby, a single, empty coffee mug rested upright on a crate, its surface bone-dry inside. "Harris, look at this," called out Petty Officer Jenkins, his voice hushed. He pointed to the wheelhouse windows. Fingerprints, dozens of them, small and large, smeared the glass on the inside, as if many hands had pressed desperately against it, looking out. But the glass itself was unbroken, the door sealed. Inside the wheelhouse, the silence deepened. Dust motes danced in the weak light. The ship's wheel stood centered, locked in position. Charts were spread neatly on the navigation table, yellowed but intact. The radio console, however, was a ruin. The microphone lay shattered on the floor, wires ripped out, the casing cracked open as if struck by tremendous force. Yet, the console itself showed no scorch marks, no sign of fire. Like someone tore it apart in a rage, Jenkins muttered, nudging a broken plastic shard with his boot. Commander Harris moved towards the captain's cabin. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, the hinges groaning a protest that shattered the tomb-like silence. Captain Vance's quarters were preserved in eerie detail. His pipe lay on the desk beside an open logbook. His uniform jacket hung neatly on the back of his chair. Harris approached the log, his gloved finger tracing the final entry. The handwriting, usually precise, became a frantic scrawl towards the bottom of the page. Asterisk, sky wrong, water not right, sound in the hull. Not engine, they whisper, asterisk, the last words were nearly illegible. Asterisk, light below us, pulling, asterisk, then, nothing. The next page was blank. On the wall above the desk, a large, detailed map of the Atlantic was pinned. Someone had drawn a thick, jagged red circle around a patch of open ocean hundreds of miles from the Orion's planned course. In the center of the circle, written in the same red ink, was a single chilling word, deep. Outside, Jenkins called again, his voice tight with unease. "Commander, you need to see the galley." They descended a narrow stairwell, the beam of Harris's flashlight cutting through the oppressive gloom of the lower decks. The air grew colder, damper. The galley door stood open. Inside, it looked like a meal had been interrupted. Plates sat on a long table, covered in a thick layer of gray mold that obscured whatever food had been served. Utensils lay neatly beside them, but it was the far wall that froze the blood in their veins. Written in a dark, sticky substance, rust, dry blood, across the entire metal surface were 3 words, repeated over and over in frantic, uneven capital letters. "Don't look down." Beneath the words, on the floor, lay a single, well-worn deck shoe. It pointed directly towards a heavy, closed hatch set into the floor, the entrance to the deepest cargo hold. A hold, Harris knew from the manifest, that should have been packed with heavy machinery. Now, from beyond that cold, sealed metal came the faintest, most impossible sound, a slow, rhythmic thump, 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 like a giant, weary heartbeat echoing up from the abyss below the ship. Jenkins turned pale. That can't be the sea. It's too regular, too alive. Commander Harris stared at the hatch, the rhythmic thudding vibrating faintly through the soles of his boots. The words on the wall screamed silently in the gloom. Every instinct screamed danger, retreat. But the ghost of Captain Vance's frantic log entry, the terrified plea on the galley wall, the impossible sound below, they pulled him forward. He knelt, his gloved hand finding the heavy iron wheel that sealed the hatch. It was cold, almost painfully so. "Jenkins," he said, his voice low and rough, light. The beam of the flashlight steadied on the hatch wheel. Harris took a deep breath of the stale, cold air and began to turn it. The mechanism groaned, a sound of immense pressure and long disuse. With a final, grating shriek, the locking bolts retracted. Harris gripped the edge of the heavy metal plate. The thumping sound seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Asterisk thump. 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 Asterisk, he braced himself and heaved the hatch open. A wave of frigid, damp air, smelling of salt, rust, and something else, something metallic and organic like old seaweed and copper, rushed up, making them cough. Jenkins shone the light down into the yawning darkness. The beam cut through swirling dust motes, illuminating the top rungs of a steep metal ladder, descending into utter blackness. The thumping was clearer now, echoing up from the depths, deep and resonant. Harris pointed the beam downwards, but the light seemed swallowed by the darkness below after only 20 feet. Nothing was visible but the ladder vanishing into the gloom and the immense, dark space surrounding it. The hold was cavernous, easily large enough to swallow their cutter hole. And it was empty, completely, utterly empty. No mischievity, no krats, just vast, hollow darkness and a relentless asterisk thump. Thump, thump, asterisk, rising from far below. The manifest said hold 3 was full. Jenkins whispered, his voice trembling. Tons of steel parts. Where's it all? Harris leaned further over the opening, shining the light along the walls. The steel plates were scarred, covered in long, deep parallel gouges, as if massive claws had scraped down the sides. And something else, patches of thick, slimy residue, dark green and glistening faintly in the flashlight beam, smeared across the metal. Commander, look. Jenkins pointed his own light towards the bottom of the ladder, barely visible in the gloom. Lying on the metal grating at the base, partially obscured by shadow, was a shape. It was small, dark, and lumpy. Harris squinted. It looked like a bundle of wet rags. No. As the light steadied, the shape resolved. It was a uniform, a sailor's uniform, and inside it, collapsed in on itself, as if the body within had simply dissolved, lay a jumble of bones. Not clean, white bones, but bones stained dark, almost black, and covered in the same slimy green residue. The thumping sound seemed to pulse around them, vibrating the very air. Suddenly, Jenkins's light jerked upwards. Did you see that? He hissed. Down there in the dark. Movement. Harris swept his beam frantically across the vast emptiness. For a second, he thought he saw something shift at the very edge of the light, something large and indistinct sliding silently through the deeper shadows near the far wall. A shape that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Then it was gone. We need to get out of here, Harris said, his voice tight with a fear he hadn't felt since wartime. Now, as they scrambled back from the hatch, the thumping intensified, becoming faster, almost agitated. Thump, thump, thump. It echoed through the empty hold, through the decks, shaking the very bones of the old ship. They backed out of the galley, the beam of the flashlight dancing wildly. Harris slammed the galley door shut, leaning against it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rhythmic pounding from below seemed to seep through the floor, vibrating up through his body. We need to sweep the rest of the ship, Harris ordered, trying to regain control, though his knuckles were white on the flashlight. Topside, crew quarters, engine room, fust. They moved quickly through narrow corridors lined with cabin doors. Most were closed. Harris pushed one open. Inside, a small bunk room. 2 bunks neatly made. Personal photos still pinned to the wall. Smiling faces frozen in time. A book lay open, face down, on a small desk, its pages brittle and yellowed. Another cabin revealed a similar scene of interrupted life. But the third cabin, the door was splintered around the lock, shattered from the inside. Inside, the tiny room was a hurricane of destruction. The mattress was shredded, stuffing erupting like guts. The small desk was overturned. Deep scratches like those in the cargo hold gouged the metal walls. And on the floor, near the porthole, lay a single object, a brass pocket watch, its glass face cracked, the hands frozen at 3:17 a.m. Harris picked it up. Engraved on the back were the initials RT, radio technician Robert Teller, according to the crew manifest. The man whose shattered microphone they'd found. As they near the engine room entrance, a heavy, watertight door, the rhythmic thumping from below was momentarily drowned out by a new sound, a low, guttural groan of straining metal coming from behind the door. Not the groan of an old ship settling. This sounded alive, tortured. Harris turned the wheel lock. The groan grew louder as the door cracked open. A wave of intense heat and the smell of hot oil and ozone blasted out. Jenkins shone his light inside. The massive engine block, cold and silent for 16 years, was spotless, gleaming, not a speck of dust or rust. It looked as if it had just been shut down moments ago. Steam faintly hissed from a valve, but the groan wasn't coming from the engine itself. It came from the thick pipes running along the ceiling. They were visibly vibrating, shuddering as if under immense pressure from within. One pipe, near a joint, pulsed rhythmically, in perfect time with the thumping from the cargo hold deep below them. Asterisk thump, groan, thump, groan. Asterisk Harris stepped back, pulling the heavy doors shut with a clang that echoed like a gunshot in the corridor. The sounds felt like they were closing in, pressing on his skull. Topside, he rasped. We need air. Now. They practically ran back the way they came, bursting out onto the main deck near the bow. The fog had thickened, wrapping the Orion in a suffocating gray blanket. The open air offered no relief. The silence of the sea felt heavy, watchful. Harris leaned against the railing, sucking in deep breaths of the damp air, trying to clear the smell of the hold and the engine room from his lungs. That's when he saw it, etched into the railing right where his hand rested, almost invisible unless the light caught it just right, was a series of marks. Not the crude circles from the stern deck. These were different, precise, almost mathematical. A sequence of short and long dashes, deeply gouged into the metal. Dash. He traced the marks, a cold dread solidifying in his gut. He knew Morse code. Every sailor did. This wasn't random scratching. It was a message, a desperate, final message carved with immense effort. Pinola, Pianola? The word meant nothing. A code? A name? A place? Before he could process it, Jenkins gasped, pointing upwards. Commander! The mast! Harris looked up. High above, near the top of the main mast, barely visible in the fog, something was lashed to the metal framework. It wasn't rigging. It was too bulky, too irregular. It looked like a bundle wrapped in dark, stained canvas. And as they watched, frozen, a low moan, not metal this time, unmistakably human, filled with utter despair, drifted down from the shrouded heights. It hung in the fog for a long, terrible moment, then faded, leaving only the relentless thump, groan, rising from the belly of the ghost ship. The Orion wasn't just abandoned. She was occupied by something that defied reason. And whatever it wasn't finished with them yet. The fog pressed closer, muffling the world, turning the derelict ship into an island of nightmares adrift on a silent sea. Harris knew they were trapped. The cutter seemed a world away, hidden by the gray curtain. The sounds within the ship were a tightening noose. He looked at Jenkins, the young man's face pale with terror in the dim light. The message on the railing, Pianola, burned in his mind. Was it a warning? A clue to what happened? Or the name of the thing that now hunted them in the fog? The moan from the mast came again, weaker this time, a sound of broken exhaustion. Then, a new sound cut through the oppressive quiet. A slow, wet dripping. Harris slowly turned his head. Below the mast, on the deck near the base, dark droplets were falling from above, plinking onto the metal with a soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. He shone his light. The droplets were thick, viscous, not water, dark red, almost black in the gloom. Blood, fresh blood, falling from the canvas-wrapped bundle high above. Jenkins made a choke sound. Harris felt his own breath catch. The thing on the mast wasn't just moaning. It was bleeding, and the dripping was getting faster. Tap, tap, tap. A chilling counterpoint to the deep thump from below and the groaning pipes. They were surrounded by the ship's terrible symphony. Suddenly, a loud metallic bang echoed from the superstructure behind them, the sound of a heavy door slamming shut. They spun around, flashlights cutting erratic paths through the fog. The door to the crew quarters hallway, which they'd left open, was now firmly closed. As they watched, the wheel lock on the outside began to turn, slowly, deliberately clockwise, locking them out. Someone or something was inside, sealing them on the deck, with the thing on a mast, and whatever lay below. No! Jenkins yelled, lunging for the door, grabbing the wheel. It was locked tight. He pounded on the heavy metal. Hey, open up! Only silence answered him. Then a new sound started, faint at first, drifting from somewhere deep within the locked superstructure. Music, tinny, distorted, like an old record player with a worn needle. A jaunty, upbeat melody from another era, a tune Harris vaguely recognized as a popular song from the 1940s. It was completely out of place, jarringly cheerful against the backdrop of dripping blood and groaning metal. The music grew slightly louder, echoing strangely through the corridors within. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of the galley with the words, "Don't look down," smeared on the wall. Jenkins stopped pounding, listening, his face a mask of confusion and dread. What is that? Why is there music? Harris didn't answer. He was looking past Jenkins, towards the bow. The fog swirled, thinning for just a moment. On the very tip of the bow, where the anchor chains descended into the dark water, stood a figure, silhouetted against the gray. It was tall, impossibly thin, and unnaturally still. It wore what looked like a tattered, dark coat, but its shape was wrong, elongated, almost spindly. It faced out to sea, not moving. Harris couldn't see any details in the gloom, only the stark outline. Jenkins, he whispered, pointing with a shaking hand. The bow. Look. Jenkins turned, his flashlight beam sweeping across the deck, finally catching the figure just as the fog thickened again, swallowing it from view. But in that split second, the beam had illuminated enough. The figure wasn't standing on the deck. It was standing on the anchor chain itself, impossibly balanced over the dark water. And as the light hit it, the figure didn't flinch or turn. Its head, too small for its body, tilted slowly, unnaturally, backwards, as if looking straight up at the mast where the blood dripped. Then it was gone, dissolved into the fog. The cheerful music continued to play inside the locked ship, a cruel mockery. The blood dripped faster. Osteris top, osteris the pipes gruonet. The hole below thumped, and the wheel lock on the door remained firmly turned. They were not alone. They were surrounded, and the ghost ship SS Orion was wide awake. The fog tasted like wet ashes. Commander Harris swallowed, his throat tight, every nerve screaming. The cheerful music from inside the locked superstructure, that jaunty, impossible tune, felt like needles in his ears. Below his boots, the deck vibrated with a relentless thump, groan from the hold and the pipes. Above, the tap-tap-tap of fresh blood hitting the deck near the mast was a chilling metronome. And the figure, that impossibly thin, backwards tilting shape on the anchor chain, gone, but its presence lingered like a cold breath on his neck. Petty Officer Jenkins pressed his back against the locked door, his breathing shallow and fast. "Commander, what do we do?" His voice was a thin rasp, swallowed by the fog. "The cutter, they won't know." Harris forced his mind away from the crawling dread. Asterisk, think. Sailor. Think. Asterisk, he looked up. The bundle on the mast. Blood was falling faster now, pooling dark and slick on the deck. That low moan came again, weaker, a sound of pure agony. Whoever, or whatever, was up there was still alive. Barely. And the blood. It was a horrific countdown. "We climb," Harris said, his voice rough but steady. He pointed his flashlight beam upwards. The main mast rose like a skeletal finger into the gray void, shrouded in rigging. Metal rungs, a maintenance ladder, were bolted to its side, disappearing into the mist. "That's a person up there, Jenkins. We get them down." Jenkins stared wide-eyed. "Climb? With that thing out here? And the music?" "We ignore the music," Harris snapped, though the unnatural cheerfulness made his skin crawl. "We ignore everything but that ladder and the person bleeding out above us. The cutter will be monitoring." They heard our last transmission. They'll come looking when we go silent. But right now, that person dies if we don't move. Now, secure your light. Follow me. He didn't wait for agreement. He holstered his flashlight, grabbed the cold, wet rung, and hauled himself up. The metal was slippery with condensation. The fog pressed close, dampening sound and sight, turning the world into a gray tunnel. Below, Jenkins hesitated only a second before scrambling up after him. The climb was a nightmare. The rhythmic thump from below vibrated through the mast, humming in Harris's bones. The groaning pipes sounded like a dying beast. The cheerful music drifted up from somewhere deep within the ship, a grotesque soundtrack. And always, the tap-tap-tap of blood hitting the deck far below grew fainter as they ascended, replaced by the thick, coppery smell that hung heavy in the damp air. Halfway up, the fog thinned slightly. Harris paused, catching his breath, looking down. Jenkins was 10 rungs below, face pale, clinging tightly. The deck looked small, distant. The pool of blood was a dark stain. The locked door seemed insignificant. Then movement. Near the base of the mast, where the blood pooled, the fog swirled. A shape coalesced low, dark, indistinct. It seemed to flow over the pool, not through it, absorbing the light. It lingered for a second, a patch of deeper shadow, then melted back into the gray as Jenkins's panicked light beam swept over the spot. "Commander, did you see? Keep climbing," Harris ordered, his own heart hammering against his ribs. "Don't look down. Eyes on the rungs." The plea etched on the galley wall echoed in his mind. Don't look down. They climbed higher. The air grew colder. The sound from below became muffled, replaced by the whistle of wind through the rigging and the creak of the mast itself. The cheerful music faded, replaced by something else. A new sound. Faint, rhythmic. Not the deep thump. Not dripping. It sounded like clicking, metallic, rapid clicking. It seemed to come from inside the mast, near the top. Finally, Harris reached the topmost platform, a small metal grating encircling the masthead light. The bundled shape was lashed tightly to the framework just above it with thick, salt-crusted rope. It was larger than it looked from below, roughly human-sized, wrapped tightly in dark, stained canvas sailcloth. The lower end was soaked through with fresh, dark blood that dripped steadily onto the platform grating. The metallic clicking was louder here, rhythmic, persistent. Click, 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 click. Harris hauled himself onto the small platform, Jenkins scrambling up beside him, gasping. The fog swirled around them, cutting them off from the world. They were perched on a tiny island in a gray sea. The only sounds the wind, the clicking, and a weak, wet gurgling coming from within the canvas bundle. "Help me." The voice was barely a whisper, shredded with pain. Human, undeniably human. Harris drew his knife, the blade glinting dully. "We're here," he said, his voice tight. "Hold on." He sought at the thick ropes binding the bundle to the mast. Jenkins frantically worked on the other side, his fingers clumsy with cold and fear. The clicking sounds seemed to intensify, faster now. Click, click, click. The ropes fell away. Harris carefully pulled back the stiff, blood-soaked canvas from the top. Jenkins shone his light. The breath caught in Harris's throat. Inside the canvas shroud was a man, or what was left of one. He wore the tattered remnants of an SS Orion crew uniform, the insignia of the chief mate. His face was a mask of agony, etched deep in his skin stretched taut over bone. He was horribly thin, emaciated, but the horror wasn't just starvation. His skin, it had a strange, waxy sheen, almost translucent in places. Dark veins stood out like ink spilled under parchment. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, rolled towards Harris, filled with unimaginable terror. "Deep," the man gurgled, blood bubbling at his lips. "It came from the deep." "What came?" Harris asked urgently, leaning closer. "Who did this? What happened?" The man's hand, skeletal and trembling, shot out with surprising strength, grabbing Harris's wrist. His touch was ice cold. "Pianola." He rasped, the word thick with blood. "The music box in the hold. It woke them. Click, 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 click. The sound was frantic now, coming from inside the man's chest cavity. Harris looked down. The man's uniform shirt was torn open. Beneath the translucent skin, something moved. Something dark and segmented, like the leg of a giant insect, pressed against the inside of his ribcage. Click, click, click. It was the source of the sound. The thing inside him was clicking. Jenkins gagged, turning away, retching over the edge of the platform. The chief mate's eyes locked onto Harris's, a final, desperate plea. Kill it, he choked. Before it hatches, his body convulsed violently. A wet, tearing sound. A dark, chitinous spike, slick with blood and mucus, punched through the thin skin of his chest. Click! Then the light in his eyes went out. His hand fell limp from Harris's wrist. He slumped, motionless. The clicking stopped abruptly. Silence, except for the wind and the distant, muffled groan from far below. Harris stared, numb, at the obscene black spike protruding from the dead man's chest. Hatches, the pianola, a music box, in the hold, waking them. Suddenly, Jenkins screamed, not a shout of terror, but a raw, agonized shriek. Harris whirled. Jenkins was staring down at his hands. The hands that had touched the blood-soaked ropes, the canvas. Where his skin had contacted the dark blood, it wasn't just stained. It was changing. A network of thin, dark lines like the dead man's veins was spreading rapidly up his fingers and across his palms. The skin where the lines spread took on that same waxy, translucent sheen. Jenkins clawed at his hands, frantic, sobbing. It burns. Commander, it burns. Before Harris could react, a new sound cut through the silence. Not music, not thumping, not clicking. A sound that froze the blood in his veins. Scratching, asterisk. Slow, deliberate, metallic scraping. It was coming from below them. From the outside of the mast. From just below the platform. Harris slowly leaned over the edge of the grating, shining his light down the ladder they had just climbed. A hand grasped a rung. But it wasn't human. The fingers were too long, too thin, the skin a mottled gray-green, stretched taut over bone. Black, hooked claws scraped against the metal as it pulled itself up another rung. Then a head tilted into the beam of light. It was the figure from the anchor chain. Its face was a grotesque parody. No nose, just slits. The mouth was a lipless gash. But the eyes, they were large, entirely black, and reflected the light like an insect's. They fixed unblinkingly on Harris. It tilted its head backwards impossibly far, the gash mouth opening slightly, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. It was climbing. Fast. And it was only a few rungs below Jenkins, who was still staring in horror at his transforming hands, oblivious. The ghost ship had not just been waiting. It had been breeding. And now, its nightmare children were awake. Harris gripped his knife, the dead chief mate's warning echoing in the howling wind. Kill it before it hatches the battle. For survival on the SS Orion had just begun, hundreds of feet above a dark, hungry sea. The thing on the ladder tilted its head back further, that lipless gash widening into a silent, needle-filled scream aimed at the fog. Jenkins, consumed by the burning horror spreading up his arms, finally saw it. His scream ripped through the air, raw and primal, drowning out the wind. Harris didn't think. He moved. Years of combat reflexes took over. He lunged past the shuddering Jenkins, his knife flashing in the weak light, not at the creature's head, but at its grotesquely elongated fingers gripping the rung just below the platform edge. The blade struck bone-like cartilage with a sickening thwack. Black, viscous fluid spurted. The creature didn't roar. It made a sound like air escaping a punctured bellows, a dry, rattling hiss. Its grip loosened. It didn't fall. It flowed. Like liquid shadow, it detached from the ladder, twisting in midair with impossible agility. Its black eyes never left Harris. It landed silently on the side of the mast, clinging like a nightmare spider, its hooked claws finding purchase on the painted metal. Then it began to crawl sideways, circling the mast, aiming to flank them on the tiny platform. Jenkins, the rope. Grab a rope. Harris yelled, pointing to the severed ends of the line that had bound the chief mate's corpse. Jenkins, whimpering, his hands now shimmering with that unnatural translucence up to his wrists, fumbled for the thick, blood-slick rope. Harris kept his light, and his knife pointed at the crawling horror. The creature paused, its head cocking at an unnatural angle. It seemed to be listening. The cheerful music from inside the ship had changed. The jaunty tune was warping, slowing down, the notes dragging and distorting into a discordant, mournful dirge. The sound seeped through the fog, chilling the air further. Seizing the distraction, Harris grabbed the other end of the rope Jenkins held. "Tie it around your waist. Secure it." He frantically looped his end around a sturdy metal bracket on the masthead light housing, pulling it tight. Jenkins, movements clumsy and pained, managed a crude knot around his own midsection. The creature hissed again, its focus snapping back, and launched itself towards Jenkins. Harris shoved Jenkins hard towards the edge of the platform. "Jump!" Jenkins didn't hesitate. Terror overrode pain. He threw himself backwards off the platform into the swirling gray void. The rope snapped taut. Harris, braced against the mast, felt the brutal jolt through his arms. The creature's claws whistled through the air where Jenkins had been a split second before, raking sparks off the metal grating. The creature whirled, enraged, its black eyes fixing on Harris. It scrabbled towards him, faster now, a blur of spindly limbs and glistening fangs. Harris had seconds. He saw the dead chief mate's body, the dark spikes still protruding. He saw the pulsating light far below in the empty hold Captain Vance had written about. He saw the rope straining under Jenkins's weight. He dropped his knife. It clattered onto the grating. He grabbed the rope with both hands, planted his boot on the edge of the platform, and jumped backwards with all his strength, pushing away from the mast. He plummeted. Wind screamed past his ears. Fog swallowed him. The rope burned through his gloves. Above, he heard the creature's furious, airless hiss cut short as he fell past the level of the mast platform. He caught a glimpse of it leaning over the edge, those black eyes watching him fall. Then the rope went slack. Jenkins's weight was gone. No. Asterisk Harris hit the deck hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He rolled, gasping, tangled in the rope. He scrambled to his knees, flashlight beam slicing through the fog. Jenkins lay a few feet away, groaning, the rope still tied around him. He'd landed near the base of the mast, beside the dark pool of blood. The spreading darkness under Jenkins's skin had reached his elbows. His eyes, when he looked at Harris, held a glassy sheen. CL climbed. Jenkins choked out, pointing a trembling, translucent finger upwards. It climbed down fast. Harris looked up. The mast vanished into fog. But he heard it. The rapid, skittering scrape of claws on metal, descending. Fast. Too fast to outrun. The locked door. It was their only chance. Harris hauled Jenkins to his feet. "Move." To the door. They stumbled across the deck, Jenkins leaning heavily on him, leaving smeared footprints in the bloody pool. The skittering sound grew louder, closer. The distorted dirge from inside the ship swelled, a cacophony of broken notes. They reached the heavy metal door. The locking wheel was still turned. Harris grabbed it, heaving with all his might. It didn't budge. "Help me," he yelled at Jenkins. Jenkins, his breath coming in ragged, pained gasps, placed his shimmering hands on the wheel. Together, they strained. Metal shrieked in protest. The skittering was right above them now. Harris risked a glance upwards. A dark shape dropped from the mast rigging, landing silently on the deck 10 feet away. The creature straightened, taller than a man, its head tilting backwards, those black insect eyes fixing on them. It took a step forward, claws clicking on the metal. With a final, grating shriek of tortured metal, the locking wheel snapped. The door flew inward with a bang, revealing the dimly lit corridor beyond. Harris shoved Jenkins through and stumbled after him, slamming the heavy door shut behind them. He grabbed the inside wheel lock, spinning it frantically. Asterisk clang, clang, clang. Asterisk something heavy slammed into the outside of the door. Once, twice, then silence. Only the frantic pounding of their own hearts and the warped, mournful music echoing from deeper within the ship. They were inside, but the creature was outside, waiting, and the Orion itself seemed to breathe around them, the air thick with the smell of rust, decay, and something else, something sweetly rotten, like overripe fruit left in the sun. Jenkins collapsed against the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor, cradling his arms. The dark lines were creeping towards his shoulders. His skin was cold to the touch. "It doesn't hurt as much now," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Just cold. So cold. And I can hear it." "Hear what?" Harris asked, keeping his light trained down the corridor towards the source of the music. The cheerful tune was completely gone, replaced by the slow, discordant dirge. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the galley. "The clicking," Jenkins murmured, his eyes unfocused. "Inside? Like the chief mate. But softer, like something sleeping." He tilted his head, listening to something Harris couldn't hear. "Pianola," he breathed. "The music box wakes them, but the deep sings to them." Harris remembered the words scrawled on Captain Vance's map. Deep. The pulsing light in the hold. The thumping that mirrored the groaning pipes. He pulled the folded, brittle pages of Vance's log from his pocket. The pages he'd ripped from the book in the captain's cabin. He hadn't had time to read them fully. He shone his light on the frantic scrawl. Not engine noise. Deeper. Resonating through the hull. A hum. Low. Constant. Feels like it's inside my skull. Crew reporting same. Teller smashed the radio, trying to make it stop. Didn't work. Worse now. Sounds like whispers. Words we can't understand. But they feel hungry. Asterisk. Sky is wrong color at dusk. Not red. Purple. Deep purple, like a bruise. Water too calm. Like oil. Reflections don't look right. Shapes moving under the surface. Big. Not fish. Crewman Briggs saw a face in the water. Not human. Laughed at him. Then he vanished. Just gone. Over the side. No splash. Asterisk. Found the box. Brass. Intricate. Like a music box, but wrong symbols. Not made here. Not made anywhere I know. Washed up or left. In cargo hold 3, buried under crates. Crewman Pike touched it. Started screaming about beautiful music. We locked it in the chain locker. But the humming, the whispering, it got louder. Stronger. Like it was angry. Asterisk. Light below us. Green. Pulsing. From the deep. The singing, it's calling to the box. Pike is at the chain locker door. Smiling. Says he needs to let the music play. Says it wants to be heard. Others are gathering. Their eyes empty. Vance out. Asterisk. The final entry. Harris's blood ran cold. The chain locker. A small, cramped space near the bow, usually storing anchor chains, where they had locked the pianola music box. The source of the waking. The source of the music. The discordant dirge stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Then a new sound began. Not cheerful, not mournful. This was different, delicate, tinkling, like tiny glass bells. Beautiful, unervingly beautiful. And it was coming from the bow, from the chain locker. Jenkins's head snapped up. His glassy eyes widened. A slow, dreamy smile spread across his face, grotesque against the spreading corruption. "It's playing," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "The pianola, it's playing for me." He tried to push himself up. "I have to let it out. It wants to be heard." Harris grabbed his shoulder. "Jenkins." "No. Fight it." Jenkins turned his head. The smile didn't waver, but his eyes held a terrifying vacancy. "Don't you hear it, Commander?" he asked softly. "It's the most beautiful sound. It makes the cold go away. It makes the hunger go quiet." He looked towards the bow, towards the tinkling bells. "The deep is singing, and the pianola answers. I need to open the door." He pulled against Harris's grip with surprising strength. The beautiful, tinkling music drifted down the corridor, weaving through the stale air. From outside the heavy door they just locked, a slow, deliberate scrape began. The creature was dragging its claws along the metal. Waiting. Listening. Harris was trapped between the horror outside the door and the nightmare unfolding within. Jenkins, transforming, drawn to the music box. The pianola was awake, and its song was a siren call to the abyss. The ghost ship wasn't just haunted. It was a conduit, and the deep was calling its children home. The beautiful, tinkling music was a poison in the air. Jenkins strained against Harris's grip, his glassy eyes fixed on the bow, his dreamy smile chilling. "Let me go, Commander. It needs to be heard. The deep is waiting." Outside the door, the creature's claws scraped a slow, patient rhythm against the metal. Asterisk scrape, scrape, scrape. Asterisk a promise of violence held back only by the heavy steel. Harris knew the door wouldn't hold forever. He looked at Jenkins, the dark veins reaching his neck, the waxy skin, the terrifying vacancy behind the smile. The thing inside him was listening, waiting to hatch. He made a brutal choice. He couldn't save Jenkins, but he could stop the pianola. With a surge of desperate strength, Harris shoved Jenkins hard down the corridor, away from the bow, towards the stern. Jenkins stumbled, crashing into the wall with a cry that sounded more surprised than pained. Harris didn't wait. He turned and ran towards the music, towards the chain locker, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The tinkling bells grew louder, sweeter, weaving through the ship's groans. It pulled at him, a seductive whisper promising peace, an end to fear. He fought it, clenching his jaw, focusing on the image of the chief mate's chest erupting, Jenkins's transforming hands. The chain locker door was a heavy, rounded hatch near the bow, usually secured with a simple latch. Now it vibrated faintly. The exquisite music poured from the seams. The latch was undone. Harris gripped the cold handle. The music swelled, filling his mind, urging him to open it, to listen, to understand. He remembered Vance's log. Asterisk Pike touched it, started screaming about beautiful music. Asterisk he remembered Jenkins. Asterisk it wakes them. Asterisk he remembered the creature, born from the deep, drawn by the song. He threw the door open. Inside the cramped, damp space, coiled anchor chains glistened with condensation. Sitting atop them, pristine as if polished yesterday, was the pianola. It wasn't like any music box Harris had ever seen. Made of a brassy metal that seemed to absorb the flashlight beam, it was covered in intricate, swirling patterns that hurt his eyes to follow. Angles too sharp, curves too deep. No keyhole, just a smooth lid. And from within, the impossibly beautiful, crystalline music chimed, echoing strangely in the small space. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, a sickly green that matched the residue in the hold. The music wasn't just sound, it was a presence. It pushed against his thoughts, trying to smooth away the terror, the urgency, replacing it with a warm, drowsy acceptance. Open the lid, it seemed to whisper. Asterisk, see the beauty. Join the song. The deep welcomes you. Asterisk. Harris raised his boot. He had to destroy it. Smash it. Silence the siren call. A hand clamped onto his shoulder. Ice cold. Fingers like iron. Jenkins stood beside him, breathing heavily. The dark veins now traced a map of corruption across his face. His eyes were entirely black, reflecting the pianola's green pulse. But the dreamy smile was gone, replaced by a predatory hunger. His voice was a guttural rasp, nothing human left. No, it sings. We listen. Outside the superstructure, the scraping stopped. A heavy thud shook the door they'd locked. Then another. The creature was ramming it. Jenkins shoved Harris with unnatural strength, sending him sprawling against the chains. The flashlight clattered away, its beam illuminating swirling dust motes and Jenkins's looming shadow. Jenkins lunged not for Harris, but for the pianola, his corrupted hands reaching for the lid, desperate to open it fully, to unleash the song upon the waiting deep. Harris scrambled. His hand closed on a heavy metal shackle pin, fallen from the chains. He swung it wildly as Jenkins turned back towards him, drawn by the movement. The pin connected with Jenkins's temple with a sickening crack. Jenkins staggered, a guttural hiss escaping his lipless mouth, a sound disturbingly like the creature outside. Black fluid, not blood, oozed from the wound. But he didn't fall. He lunged again, claws extending from his shimmering fingers. Harris ducked, the claws whistling past his ear. He drove his shoulder into Jenkins's midriff, slamming him back against the chains. The pianola's music intensified, frantic now, a warning scream disguised as beauty. Thud! The door outside groaned under another massive impact. Harris saw his chance. He grabbed the shackle pin again, not aiming for Jenkins, but for the gleaming brass surface of the pianola. He brought the heavy pin down with all his strength, right onto the center of the intricate lid. A sound like shattering glass, magnified 1,000 times, exploded through the chain locker. Not the music box breaking, but the music itself shattering. The beautiful chimes twisted into a single, ear-splitting shriek of pure dissonance. The green light flared violently, then winked out. Silence. Sudden, absolute, and profound. Jenkins froze. A tremor ran through his corrupted body. The black, insectal eyes widened in shock, then confusion. The predatory hunger faded, replaced by a flicker of pure, human terror. "Commander?" He whispered, his voice raw, his own again for a fleeting second. Then his body convulsed violently. A wet, tearing sound echoed the chief mate's death. Multiple dark, chitinous spikes erupted from his chest and back. He collapsed onto the chains, twitching, then lay still. The thing inside had hatched, only to die with the song. Crash! Asterisk, the heavy door to the deck finally gave way, buckling inward. The spindly creature filled the doorway, its head tilted back, black eyes scanning the locker. It hissed, smelling the death, the silence. It saw Harris, crouched by the silent, dented pianola. It saw Jenkins's corpse, sprouting dark spikes. It took a step forward, claws raised. Suddenly, a deafening blare cut through the silence. Not the ship's horn, the cutter's horn. Powerful searchlights pierced the fog outside, beams slicing through portholes, illuminating the corridor in stark white light. Shouts echoed, distorted by the hull. "Harris! Jenkins! Respond!" The creature flinched violently from the light and the noise. It let out that same airless, rattling hiss, a sound of pure rage and frustration. It looked at Harris, then at the broken pianola, then back toward the invasive lights. With unnatural speed, it turned and flowed down the corridor, not towards the deck entrance, but deeper into the ship, towards the stern, towards the groaning pipes and the empty cargo hold. Harris didn't hesitate. He snatched up his flashlight and ran towards the shattered deck door, towards the blinding lights and the blessed sound of human voices. He burst out onto the deck. The cutter was alongside, searchlights pinned on the Orion, armed sailors lining the rail. "Commander!" A voice boomed through a megaphone. "Status." Harris stumbled towards the railing, gasping, pointing back into the superstructure. "Alive." Jenkins lost. Creature inside. The hole, the deep. As he was hauled onto the cutter's deck, shivering despite the rescue, he looked back at the Orion. The fog was thinning. The searchlights illuminated the derelict ship in harsh detail. Suddenly, a deep, resonant thump vibrated through the water, stronger than ever before. The Orion shuddered. Then, from the dark opening of the main cargo hatch, far below the waterline, a blinding pulse of emerald green light erupted, illuminating the churning sea like a sickly sun for one terrifying second. It lit the vast, empty hold from within, revealing for a split second the long, gouged claw marks, and deep below, something immense and dark shifting in the abyssal glow. The light vanished. The thumping stopped. The groaning pipes fell silent. The SS Orion, ghost ship of the Atlantic, gave one final, mournful creak. Then, with a suddenness that stole their breath, she began to sink. Not slowly, listing, but plunging straight down, as if pulled by an invisible hand from the lightless depths below. Water roared into her holds. In less than a minute, the waves closed over her mast, leaving only swirling foam and an unnatural silence. The pianola's song was silenced, but the deep had taken its ship back. Harris stared at the empty water, the cutter's lights searching the dark waves in vain. The ocean held its secrets tighter than ever. And somewhere in the crushing blackness below, something ancient and hungry stirred, waiting for the next song to call it up from the dark.